The mystery of the half chicken. Being a park ranger in a rural area has its perks: solitude, a connection with nature, and the kind of peace and quiet city folk can only dream of. But there are also those moments, rare as they may be, when that peace is shattered by something inexplicable, something that gnaws at the edges of reason and sends a shiver down your spine. This is the story of one such moment. It was a late summer evening, and the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the landscape in shades of deep purple and blue. I was closing up for the night, driving down the 2-mile access road that snaked its way through dense woods to check on the parking areas before shutting the gate. This was routine, a task I'd done countless times before without a second thought. But that night, something was different. As I rounded a bend in the road, my headlights illuminated something lying in the middle of the road. I slowed down, squinting through the windshield to get a better look. There, right in the center of the gravel road, was half of a chicken. It was as if the bird had been torn clean in two. The sight was grotesque, but what struck me most was the absence of blood. The carcass was dry, as if it had been placed there deliberately. I parked the truck, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out to investigate. The air was still heavy with the scent of pine and earth. I crouched down, examining the chicken. It was definitely half a bird split right down the middle, feathers ruffled, but the wound looked clean, almost surgical. No blood, no signs of a struggle. I took out my phone and snapped a picture, thinking it would make for an interesting, if unsettling, story to share with the others at the station. But as I stood there, the forest around me seemed to close in. The tall pines, usually so comforting in their familiarity, now felt oppressive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt an icy finger trace down my spine. Whatever had left this here, I didn't want to meet it. F this, I muttered, straightening up and backing away. It can wait until morning. I got back in the truck, trying to shake off the unease, and continued down the road to finish my checks. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't stop thinking about that chicken. I made a mental note to come back first thing in the morning and take another look. Maybe there was some logical explanation: an animal attack, a prank, something mundane. But as I drove back out of the park, my headlights swept over the spot where the chicken had been, and I slammed on the brakes. The road was empty. The chicken was gone. I got out again, flashlight in hand, and scanned the area. Nothing. No tracks, no drag marks, no signs that anything had been there at all. The road was as it always was, just gravel and dirt, stretching off into the darkness. I shook my head, baffled. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I had. But I had the picture on my phone, a stark reminder that it hadn't been a trick of the light or a product of my imagination. When I got back to the station, I told my colleagues about what had happened. They listened, some more skeptically than others, but the mood in the room shifted from casual to uneasy. One of the older rangers, a man who had spent decades patrolling these woods, said it reminded him of something he'd heard years ago, a local legend, about strange things found in the woods, offerings left by animals or something else meant to ward off or appease unseen forces. We all laughed it off, but the nervous tension remained. The next night, I drove the same road, half expecting to see that chicken again. I didn't want to, but at the same time, I felt compelled to know if it would happen again. As I approached the spot where I had found the chicken, my heart started to race. And there it was, half a chicken, lying in the exact same spot, just as it had the night before. I didn't stop this time. I drove past it, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, and completed my rounds as quickly as I could. When I returned, the chicken was gone. I didn't get out of the truck. I just drove straight back to the station, my mind spinning with questions. Over the next few days, the same thing happened. Every night, I found half a chicken in the same spot on the road. Every night, it disappeared by the time I returned. We searched the woods for any signs of what could be responsible, but found nothing: no tracks, no feathers, no evidence that anything had even been there. We set up trail cams hoping to catch whatever it was in the act, but the cameras captured nothing but empty road and shadows. It became a sort of grim routine. Each night, the half chicken would be there, and each night it would vanish. The whole office was on edge. We couldn't figure it out. Theories ranged from the plausible to the absurd: a coyote or owl with a taste for mischief, someone playing an elaborate prank, even the possibility of something supernatural. But nothing made sense. The consistency of the event, the precise placement of the chicken, and the lack of any physical evidence were baffling. Then, after about a week, it stopped. One night I drove down the road, and the chicken wasn't there. It didn't show up the next night or the night after that. It just stopped. The relief we felt was palpable, but it was tinged with a sense of unfinished business. We never figured out what had caused it, and to this day, it remains a mystery. The picture on my phone is the only proof that it ever happened at all. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if we were just being paranoid, if there really was some simple explanation that we missed. But deep down, I know that whatever was happening on that road was beyond our understanding. The forest is a wild, ancient place full of secrets we may never uncover. And maybe that's for the best. Some things, after all, are better left unsolved. The night shift. It was my first week on the job as a graveyard security guard at an ER, and I was still getting used to the eerie silence that hung over the hospital in the dead of night. The daytime chaos of patients and doctors bustling around had died down, leaving only a few night nurses and a couple of security guards like myself to watch over the place. It was a strange environment, with the fluorescent lights casting long, creepy shadows across the empty corridors. I had heard stories from some of the other guys about how uneventful the night shifts could be. You had to keep your eyes open, but more often than not, you were just sitting there waiting for something to happen. It wasn't exactly the most thrilling job, but it was steady work and the pay was decent. One particular night, after a few hours of staring at the security monitors and walking my rounds, I decided to take a break. It was around 2 a.m., and the hospital parking lot was deserted. The night air was cool, and I could see my breath as I made my way across the lot toward the 7-Eleven that was just across the street. I needed a snack, maybe a cup of coffee, to keep myself awake for the rest of the shift. As I walked through the lot, my thoughts were drifting, lost in the mundane details of the job. That's when I heard it, the unmistakable roar of an engine. I stopped and turned, my heart skipping a beat. On the far side of the parking lot, a small hatchback had come to life. Its headlights flashed on, blinding me for a moment. And then the engine revved loudly, echoing through the still night. At first, I thought it was just some late-night visitor leaving the hospital, but something about the way that car was revving gave me a bad feeling. The engine roared again, this time louder, more aggressive. The hatchback's tires screeched against the asphalt as it suddenly lurched forward, accelerating straight toward me. Panic surged through my body. This wasn't just some careless driver, this was deliberate. Someone was trying to run me down. Adrenaline kicked in, and I started to run, my boots pounding against the pavement as I zigzagged across the lot. I had seen enough movies to know that running in a straight line was a death sentence, so I veered left, then right, trying to throw the driver off. But the car kept coming, engine roaring like a beast hunting its prey. I could see the curb at the edge of the parking lot, just about 30 yards away. If I could just make it there, I might be able to jump into the street and out of the car's path. My lungs burned and my legs felt like they were moving through molasses, but I kept running, fear driving me forward. Then, just as I was within reach of the curb, the hatchback swerved and pulled up alongside me with a screech of tires. The passenger door flew open and out jumped the last thing I expected to see, a dwarf woman with wild blonde hair, her face twisted in a scowl. "Hey you, what are you doing?" "Come here," she shouted, her voice high-pitched and angry. For a moment, my brain couldn't process what was happening. Who was this woman? And why was she chasing me? Was she the one driving that car? It didn't make any sense, but there was no time to think. My fight or flight instinct kicked in again, and I chose flight. I turned and ran as fast as I could, trying to get away from this bizarre and terrifying situation. But the woman was surprisingly fast, her short legs pumping furiously as she chased after me, still yelling. I could hear the car idling behind me. And for a split second, I thought about whether there might be someone else in the driver's seat ready to run me down again. Just when I thought things couldn't get any crazier, the driver's side door of the hatchback swung open, and out stepped Ted, one of the other security guards on duty that night. He was doubled over with laughter, tears streaming down his face as he struggled to catch his breath. I skidded to a stop, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to make sense of what was happening. Ted managed to straighten up, still chuckling, and walked over to me, slapping me on the back. "Oh man, you should have seen the look on your face," Ted said, barely able to get the words out between fits of laughter. Priceless. Absolutely priceless. The dwarf woman, who had stopped chasing me, was now leaning against the car, also laughing, though less maniacally than Ted. Her previous intensity was gone, replaced by a mischievous grin. "Sorry, buddy," she said, shaking her head. "We just couldn't resist. Ted told me you were new, and we always mess with the new guys. You're the last one on the crew we hadn't gotten yet." I stood there, panting and sweating, my brain still trying to catch up. This was a prank. They had deliberately tried to scare the living daylights out of me just for a laugh. My terror slowly began to subside, replaced by a mix of relief and simmering anger. Ted noticed the look on my face and put up his hands defensively. "Hey, don't be mad, man. It's all in good fun. We've all been through it, just part of the initiation." "Yeah, well, you almost gave me a heart attack." I snapped, though the anger was starting to drain out of me. It was hard to stay mad when they were both standing there looking so pleased with themselves. Ted grinned and nodded toward the woman. "This is Sue, by the way, my girlfriend. She's the mastermind behind this whole thing." Sue waved, still grinning. "Sorry for scaring you. But you've got to admit, it was a pretty good prank." I shook my head, trying to wrap my mind around everything that had just happened. "Yeah, I guess so," I muttered, though I still wasn't entirely sure how I felt about the whole thing. Ted clapped me on the back again. "Come on, let's get back to work. You can grab that coffee later." As we walked back to the hospital, Sue drove the hatchback alongside us, still chuckling to herself. I couldn't help but feel a little stupid for falling for their prank, but at the same time, I had to admit, it was pretty effective. They had gotten me good. Over the next few weeks, I got to know Ted and Sue better, and they turned out to be great people. Ted was always quick with a joke or a story, and Sue was sharp and funny with a wicked sense of humor. We became friends, and I learned to laugh about that night. It even became something of a badge of honor among the security team. If you hadn't been pranked by Ted and Sue, you hadn't really earned your stripes. But even now, when I think back on that night, there's still a part of me that remembers the sheer terror of that moment when I thought I was about to be run down by a madman in a hatchback. And every time I see Ted, I can't help but give him a look that says, "I still kind of hate you for that." And Sue, if you're out there, nothing but love for you. Just stay out of any hatchbacks, okay? A haunting history, the dark legacy of a command built in 1767. The command I work at has a history that stretches back over 2 centuries, a legacy that's as rich as it is dark. Built in 1767, the place has seen the rise and fall of empires, wars, and technological revolutions. But beneath the surface of its storied past lies something far more sinister, something that makes my skin crawl every time I walk through its ancient halls. When I first started working here, the atmosphere felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were burdened with secrets too dreadful to reveal. But it wasn't until I did a bit of my own digging that I realized just how deep those secrets ran. My research began as a simple curiosity, something to pass the time during long shifts, but it quickly spiraled into an obsession. I uncovered records that suggest our command was built on top of what was once an indigenous people's burial site, a sacred ground desecrated to make way for what would become a bastion of military might. The implications of this discovery were chilling. Indigenous burial sites are hallowed grounds, places where the spirits of the departed are believed to linger, guarding their resting places against intruders. To build over such a site is not just an act of disrespect, it's an invitation for the dead to reclaim what was stolen from them. And that's not even the worst of it. As I delved deeper into the archives, I stumbled upon another grim chapter in the command's history, one that's often glossed over in official accounts. Slavery was a brutal reality in the early days of this country, and our command was no exception. The slaves who labored here were treated as little more than expendable assets, their lives and deaths deemed insignificant. One particularly disturbing article I found detailed the discovery of a mass grave not far from the command, where the remains of these forgotten souls were unceremoniously dumped. It's said that the souls of those who die unjustly or violently often find no peace, trapped in the places where they suffered. I can't help but wonder how many restless spirits wander these grounds, their pain and anger echoing through the ages. But it's not just the ancient history of the place that's troubling. The command's foundry, once a bustling hub of activity, was notorious for its dangerous working conditions. OSHA wasn't established until 1934, and even then, enforcement was lax until after World War II. Before that, safety protocols were more of an afterthought than a priority. The billet presses were massive machines capable of mangling steel and flesh with equal ease. The old-timers who'd been here long enough still tell stories of men who were caught up in those machines, losing limbs or worse, their lives. The foundry was a place of relentless noise, heat, and the ever-present threat of death. It's no wonder that those who died there might still linger, their spirits bound to the place where they met such a horrific end. The stories of ghostly apparitions, strange noises, and cold spots in the foundry have been passed down from generation to generation, each new recruit adding their own eerie encounters to the growing lore. I've always been skeptical of ghost stories, chalking them up to overactive imaginations or the tricks of a tired mind. But then I had my own encounter and experience that shook me to my core and left me questioning everything I thought I knew. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I was on the night shift. The command was quiet, the kind of silence that presses down on you, making even the smallest noise seem deafening. I was hungry, so I decided to head to the break room for a snack. The hallways were dimly lit, the only sound the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. As I approached the break room, the lights flickered once, then twice, before plunging me into complete darkness. My first thought was that there was a problem with the breaker, so I turned back to head to the electrical room. As I rounded the corner, I saw something, or someone standing by the breaker box. It was a shadowy figure, its outline barely discernible in the darkness. I called out, assuming it was a coworker, but there was no response. The figure didn't move, just stood there, almost as if it were waiting for something. A cold chill ran down my spine, and a sense of dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. I pulled out my mag light and aimed the beam directly at the figure. The light cut through the darkness, but when it reached the spot where the figure should have been, there was nothing there. The space was empty, the breaker box untouched. I could feel the air around me growing colder, the temperature dropping rapidly. My breath came out in misty puffs and my heart began to race. I don't know what it was, fear, instinct, or something else, but I turned and ran as fast as I could back to my office. I didn't stop until I was inside. The door locked behind me. My hands were shaking as I fumbled for my phone, checking the time. It was 2:15 a.m. For the next few hours, I stayed holed up in my office, the memory of that shadowy figure replaying over and over in my mind. I tried to rationalize what I'd seen, telling myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I'd seen something that shouldn't have been there. When the first shift workers started trickling in around 5 a.m., I finally felt safe enough to leave my office. I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I didn't want to be labeled as the guy who saw ghosts. But the experience left a mark on me, one that I can't shake no matter how hard I try. Since that night, I've become more attuned to the strange happenings around the command. The flickering lights, the cold spots that seem to appear out of nowhere, the faint whispers that drift through the halls when no one else is around, they've all become a part of my daily routine. I'm not sure if it's just my mind playing tricks on me or if there really is something supernatural at work. All I know is that this place has a dark past and the shadows of that past still linger, waiting for the unwary to cross their path. I don't know if I believe in ghosts, but I do believe in the power of history, the way it can shape a place, leaving behind echoes that refuse to fade. Whether those echoes are just memories or something more, I can't say. But as long as I'm working here, I'll be keeping a close eye on those shadows, and I'll be careful not to wander too far into the darkness. Because in a place like this, you never know what might be lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself.